The government in Kyiv has acknowledged that it has accepted a revised peace framework, a document initially drafted by US negotiators and subsequently modified following consultations with Ukrainian and European officials. Originally, the plan had 28 points, a proposal many saw as heavily inclined toward the demands of Moscow. But under pressure from Kyiv and its European allies, the draft was pared down to roughly 19 points. On December 2, 2025, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, accompanied by Jared Kushner, arrived in Moscow to present the revised proposal to Vladimir Putin. The optics of the visit alone signaled a rare moment. Washington actively attempting to craft terms of settlement in a war where traditional diplomacy had long stalled. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian leadership insists the process must remain serious and anchored in security guarantees that ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and long-term defense. Yet the path remains fraught. The Kremlin has described the proposals as only a potential basis for future agreements, while warning that core red lines remain. Russian rhetoric hints that unless Ukraine accepts far-reaching demands, Moscow is ready to continue its offensive. Thus, while Kyiv now speaks of a chance at peace, both the outlines of a deal and its acceptance remain far from secured. Under earlier versions of the US-backed plan, the terms reportedly included recognition of Russian control over much of the occupied territory, including areas seized since the 2022 invasion. Other early proposals contained even more contentious elements: a significant reduction in the size of Ukraine's armed forces, constitutional guarantees by Kyiv to forego future membership in NATO, and acceptance of vaguely worded security guarantees that offered little concrete protection. In return, Ukraine would receive general commitments of Western support, but without enforceable mechanisms or clear red lines for Russian violations. Ukraine's leadership has signaled they cannot accept a deal that amounts to capitulation. Instead, they demand a just peace, one that preserves sovereignty, ensures security, and does not leave Ukraine exposed to future aggression. This insistence reflects deep concerns. For many Ukrainians, accepting territorial loss or disarmament would amount to conceding years of bloodshed, sacrifice, and suffering endured since 2014, and especially after the full-scale invasion. Understanding the full context requires looking at where things stand on the battlefield. As of mid-November 2025, Russian forces occupy roughly 115,500 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, about 19% of the country. Moscow's forces have continued to make modest advances in 2025. Between October and November, they added about 165 square miles of territory. And since the start of 2025, the average monthly territorial gains have hovered around 169 to 170 square miles. Despite these incremental gains, analysts note that a sweeping Russian victory is not inevitable. Constrained manpower, logistical limitations, and Western support for Kyiv continue to blunt Moscow's ability to overrun Ukraine fully. The war, after years of offensives and counteroffensives, has settled largely into a grinding war of attrition. The proposed US-backed deal has triggered alarm among European allies of Ukraine. Many view it as dangerously tilted in favor of Russia, risking not only the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but also undermining the principle that aggression should not pay. Some European leaders and policymakers fear the proposed deal could set a precedent that rewards territorial conquest, weakening the rules-based international order. At the same time, there's recognition that war weariness, inflation, energy insecurity, and mounting domestic pressures across Europe make a long-term commitment to the war difficult to sustain. That fragility bolsters the urgency, from Washington at least, to push for a diplomatic resolution. For Kyiv, the stakes are existential: agree to the deal and Ukraine risks losing much of what it has fought to defend. Reject it and the war continues, potentially indefinitely. Even as the Ukrainian leadership remains skeptical of any agreement that sacrifices sovereignty or land, There are reasons why Kyiv is engaging diplomatically now. The strain on Ukraine's economy, infrastructure, and civilian life after years of war is immense. Reconstruction demands, energy shortages, and mass displacement weigh heavily. Meanwhile, Western military aid, long seen as vital to Ukraine's defense, has slowed. The latest push by the US suggests that future aid may depend on Kyiv signing a deal, placing Ukraine in a difficult position as winter approaches. European fatigue and political pressures may lead to waning support. A negotiated settlement might secure Ukraine's survival without endless fighting. Still, agreeing to any deal carries enormous risks, legitimizing Russian territorial gains, weakening Ukraine's long-term defense, and undermining its NATO aspirations. At this moment, several major questions remain unanswered. What will be the exact territorial lines under the final deal? Will Russia be formally recognized as controller of occupied areas such as Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia? What security guarantees will Ukraine receive, and how enforceable will they be, especially if Russia reneges? What will be the size and structure of Ukraine's post-war military? Will Ukraine be permanently barred from joining NATO? Or will there be a provision for future reconsideration? And crucially, how will the deal be viewed by the Ukrainian public? And will it survive domestic political backlash or social upheaval? Until these and other details are ironed out, the agreement remains more a framework than a binding peace treaty. If successfully implemented and enforced, the deal could bring an end to active large-scale fighting, alleviate Ukraine's humanitarian crisis, and begin a path toward reconstruction. It could also stabilize Europe, ending the largest war on the continent since World War II. However, if the deal legitimizes occupation without disarmament of Russia or fails to provide credible security guarantees, Ukraine could be left vulnerable to future aggression. Moreover, the precedent could embolden other aggressors globally, threatening the post-war international order. For Ukrainians, it may feel like choosing between a war that never ends and a fragile peace that may last only until the next test. The enduring question remains whether any agreement can realistically restrain Russia's future ambitions. The Kremlin has violated numerous agreements in the past, from the Budapest Memorandum to the Minsk Accords, which deepens Ukrainian skepticism about signing yet another document without hard, enforceable consequences. The recent agreement by Kyiv's leadership to a refined US-backed peace framework marks a historic turning point. For the first time, after years of bitter fighting, diplomacy appears able to reach Russia. Yet what lies ahead is uncertain. The stakes are existential, not only for Ukraine's territorial integrity and future, but for the broader norms of international security. Whether this moment will lead to a durable peace or a dangerous compromise may depend less on the documents signed in Moscow or Geneva than on whether European allies, Ukraine's people, and the international community are willing to defend, not just negotiate, the principles that began this war. In the coming months, Kyiv will have to balance immense international pressure with the expectations of a wartime population determined not to concede hard-won ground. Ultimately, any peace that leaves Ukraine insecure could merely pause, not end the conflict. The world now watches whether this fragile diplomatic opening becomes a foundation for lasting stability or a prelude to another chapter of turmoil.